This paper focuses on frontline health workers collective and their recent attempts to raise their voice to demand better pay and work conditions in India. This photograph is from a protest in Bangalore in January this year. Accredited social health activists, ASHAs, are community health workers who are trained to act as health educators and promoters in their respective communities. Each ASHA is expected to serve a population of about 1,000 locally in their villages or assigned area. There are about 42,000 ASHAs working in the state of Karnataka, covering 29,000 villages. There are about 1 million ASHAs throughout India. They have the local knowledge about the residents, practices, customs, and preferences. They walk into the community, they intimately know the challenges faced by the community. They go to the people and have direct interactions with them. This is crucial in delivering public health care and outreach services in remote and rural parts of the countryside. In January this year, over 33,000 ASHA workers from various parts of the state came to Bangalore and held massive rally and day-long protest. I conducted in-depth interviews and focus group discussion during this event and after. And I also followed up with them over telephone, and later during the corona crisis I called them again and conducted telephonic interviews. ASHA program was introduced in 2005 as a key component of National Rural Health Mission to strengthen rural public service delivery and bring about community engagement in health programs. Later in 2015, the National Health Mission was extended to marginalized urban areas. ASHAs are selected locally and are aged between 21 and 45 years with basic qualification between 8th and 10th grade. During induction, they are trained for about 23 days spread over a year, and later they receive specific training for certain programs. The main issue with this ASHA program is that the pay structure and amount is not fixed, with different states paying different amounts. In Karnataka, they are paid a fixed sum of rupees 6,000 per month, that is about 62 pounds, of which 4,000 rupees is being contributed by the state government and the remaining rupees 2,000 is paid by the National Health Mission. Whereas in another state, Telangana, ASHA workers get a regular salary of about 10,000 rupees, that is little over 100 pounds. Apart from this, as ASHAs are considered volunteers, they receive outcome-based incentives and financial compensation for the trainings that they attend. For example, their incentives are based on specific service such as antenatal care that involves 4 visits and ensuring that the pregnant woman gets 2 TT injection. For this, the ASHA gets rupees 300, that is about 3 pounds. Similarly, she is paid 300 rupees for institutional delivery at a government facility. According to government guidelines, her working arrangement is supposed to be flexible and should take about 2 to 3 hours per day, 4 days a week. However, in reality, her working hours stretches far beyond full time. For example, when they escort women for delivery, they stay with them and many a time end up staying day and night with the pregnant women. So, what are the roles and responsibilities of these ASHA workers? They are responsible for nearly 36 different kinds of tasks, such as registering all pregnant women in the community and providing 3 antenatal visits and 2 postnatal visits, creating awareness in the community on health programs of the government, on say nutrition, hygiene, health, sanitation and family welfare services. Apart from this, they are also regularly assigned to conduct many surveys. For example, for the malaria control program in rainy season, they are expected to conduct larva survey in their community and send reports. They counsel pregnant women on childbirth, safe delivery, institutional delivery, breastfeeding practices, and complementary feeding. Most people follow customs and traditional beliefs with respect to food and nutrition of pregnant women, lactating mothers, and young babies. They educate them about nutrition and complementary feeding and on how to take care of young infants and children. They also counsel women on contraception, spacing methods, and prevention of common infections and RTI and STIs. They are actively involved in mobilizing women in the community during immunization drives, antenatal checkups, and postnatal checkups when they are conducted weekly or monthly, and they facilitate women to attend them. Thus, they are last mile for rolling out various health programs in the community. They also provide primary medical care. For example, they are dot providers in the tuberculosis control program, collecting sputum samples and delivering medicines. They also dispense medicines for minor ailments and provide first aid for minor injuries. And most importantly, they refer patients to particular health facilities and guide them. One of the most main function in recent years has been accompanying pregnant women and children requiring treatment and admission to the nearest health facility. They are expected to travel along with them even in the night. Drug kit is provided by the government. They distribute iron folic acid tablets, oral pills, condoms, etc. to the community. They are part of the village health and sanitation committee of the local government, Gram Panchayat. They maintain birth and death registers and inform their higher authorities about health problems or disease outbreaks in the community. Overall, they monitor the status of the community. To this central list, more additional responsibilities are added by the State Department, Deputy Commissioners, as well as local medical officers. I will run a 3-minute news report of the rally and protest that was organized in January this year. What you are seeing here is a rally that was held in the beginning of January this year. ASHA workers from remote villages came to Bangalore for this. They had a list of demands. The first being that they should be given a salary of 12,000 rupees, about 120 pounds. Some of their other demands were that they had not been paid for many months, sometime between 5 to 15 months. The compensation is not just highly disproportionate to the work they do, but also very irregular. Their incentives are not paid monthly but on a piecemeal basis. State incentives are separate, payment from the central government is separate. They receive payment sometimes after 6 months or even after a year. They are unable to track their own remuneration. On many occasions, despite being eligible for payment, they end up being paid much less. Online payment systems are changed again and again, and this has added to their problems. They are supposed to register their services in an online system called RCH ASA Soft. The other problem is that they are at the mercy of ANMs or data entry operators who act as intermediaries. And if they delay entering their services, or if there is an internet issue, their payment is further delayed. They are also regularly asked to conduct many surveys over and over again, which is time consuming and unpaid. These are some of their demands. ASHA workers are playing a significant role in the fight against COVID-19. They are the crucial link in contact tracing and are helping in facilitating quarantine and creating awareness in the community. They say they have been working long hours without leave and it would help if they are given transport. There have been a few incidents of public attacking ASHA workers and other health workers when they had gone on door-to-door contact tracing. So what has been the response of the state for their demands? The response of the state for their demands has been very poor. The central government has said that this ASHA program is voluntary in nature and that they cannot pay fixed salaries to these women. It is up to individual states which are allowed to pay from their own treasury. However, states are reluctant in spite of recognizing their value. Only some of the pending dues have been paid. Corona crisis has only added to their workload. No transport and other facilities were provided during lockdown or after. The state government of Karnataka has announced 3,000 rupees, that is about 30 pounds, as incentive for COVID-19 duty. An ordinance was recently passed by the state government against attack on health workers and ASHAs, making it a punishable offence. During the COVID-19 crisis, government has made a provision of about rupees 50 lakh health insurance per health worker for 3 months. Note, the coverage of this health insurance is only for 3 months. To conclude, with almost 1 million ASHAs now selected and trained throughout the country, it has grown to become one of the largest community health worker programs in the world. Unless the government responds with care, the backbone of this public health network at the grassroots level will be crippled. Many ASHAs are motivated and take pride in the work they do. In order to sustain this, it is important to continue investing in them and to ensure that the existing ASHAs have the institutional support to deliver the ever-expanding set of services expected of them. ASHA program has over the last 10 years been successfully connecting marginalized community to public health services, especially in reproductive and child health services and in reducing maternal and child deaths. It is high time that the government takes measures to streamline their payments and incentivize them for all their work. For the enormous amount of work that they do, their compensation is low. Their demands are justified. The state should stop exploiting them. Thank you. If you have any questions, you could email me at ranjani.cr@gmail.com. Thank you very much. I can now take your questions.
Thank you very much. So that was Ranjini's video presentation. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'll spotlight her now to answer some questions because she's here to answer questions. Any questions? So I'll also enable the open podium if anyone wants to come up to speak. Publish is not working. Okay, just wondering whether there are any traditional measures or support for ASHAs carrying responsibility at their own home.
No, they don't have additional support, but there are other center. In every village there is an Anganwadi center. It's a rural child care center. Some ashas are able to take the help of this center, but the age group is 6 years. The child, if it is between 3 and 6 years, they can go leave the kid there and go out on outreach services. If not, they don't have any support system apart from their own family members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I also have a question. So for the Ashas, how do you think there can be a continuous sustainability since the government is not really supporting, and also with population explosion? Do you think there are any policy aiming at continuing to support this platform so they can keep connecting the rural areas to public health services?
The one measure is to give them fixed salary. That is what they have been demanding. There have been over 300 protests in locally as well as at the state level in the last 1.5 years. They have been demanding that, but uh, the government has not accepted their demands. And it is not a huge amount for the work that they do. Apart from that, NGOs can pitch in, but that is not sustainable. There are 42,000 ASHA workers, but it's not the NGOs will not be able to uh, pay them, and it is not sustainable. So government recognizing and giving them salaries is the best option. Or the other option is vertical programs. For example, malaria control program, they will have their own funds and they can um, divert a bit of money when asha is delivering services, but again the problem will be those who are not involved in that program will not be paid. For example, now the 3,000 rupees is only for ashas who are involved in covid duty. The others are left out. So this is the problem. There has to be a long term, sustainable solution.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's another question from Professor Sarah White. So I'll publish it right now for you to see. Okay, so she's saying, why have villagers attacked ASHA workers?
This is a recent development in Karnataka when health workers and the medical team went to the villages. This was during the COVID-19 crisis, and they asked them about their travel history, and they did not want to reveal and disclose their identity and give them all the information, fearing quarantine. And initially they there was isolation units being set up, and it was not quarantining at home. They would be taken away to isolation wards set up by the government. So people did not want to go to these government quarantine centers, and they were attacked. Their mobiles were snatched, and their purse and belongings were snatched, and their records were torn. Later on, immediately the government immediately responded in a couple of days and recognized their work, and there was a ordinance passed saying that doctors and a medical team should not be attacked. And in some places, doctors who had rented the place, the owners did not allow them to go back to their homes. That also incident also happened initially during the covid crisis, that fearing covid 19, doctors and health staff and nurses were not allowed to go back to their own homes by the community and the owners.
Okay. So, any other question? Okay, there is a third question for you here. So, we take one or two other questions. So there's a third question from Russell Madaha about the receiving compensation from the beneficiaries themselves.
Some of the beneficiaries
Can you
are
see
women.
the question?
Yeah, I saw the question. Some of the beneficiaries are very poor women, malnourished, and out of pocket expenses is for some women impossible if they are very poor. So you are catering to a community which is remote, poor, underdeveloped, and if you open up that, it will become very difficult, and they start in a way asking for money from the public. Then that would be extremely problematic if ASHA workers start demanding money for their services. So I would not go down that route at all.
Okay. All right, Ranjini, thank you very much. So we'll move on quickly to the next presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Ranjini. So it's really nice thank you for letting us know about the ASHA workers in India and how this platform is being threatened by fund and also people's ideas about what they're doing. So we appreciate your efforts. Thank you. So for our next presentation, we'll be talking about financial linkages and savings group. So this is going to be presented by Linda. All right, so we'll be talking about financial linkages and savings group as a platform. Let's see how this helps foster or constrain rural innovation. So I will be loading some file.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the panel conveners for accepting my paper for this panel. And I would also like to thank everyone present. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to receive insightful feedback. So I'm Linda Nakato from the University of Agder in Norway. Today I'll present a paper that is co-authored with my supervisors. The title has since changed, but I believe this is more reflective of what the paper is about. So I'll present a paper titled, Should Informal Financial Groups at the Bottom of the Pyramid Be Linked to Banks? A comparative analysis of linked and unlinked groups. Now we use savings groups as a representative sample of these informal financial groups, and we investigate how does linking these savings groups to formal financial institutions influence their performance. And linking in this case is of two forms, credit or savings. Either the group has a joint credit facility at the formal financial institution, or the group has a joint savings account at a formal financial institution. So this is briefly what I'll be going through today, a brief introduction, the data, the methodology, then the results, and the conclusion. So what are savings groups? Well, just imagine we are 30 people in this room and we don't have access to any form of financial institution. So what we do then, we come together, we save together, and then we borrow from those savings at an interest. So what we see here is a typical savings group setting and a typical savings groups meeting, where people are transacting in a meeting. They come and borrow and they also take loans from the loan fund. And then what we see is in this box, this is like their bank. This is where they keep their money. And it has three different keys and locks. And these keys are kept by three different people for transparency and security purposes. And this little passbook here is where they record all transactions of each member. Every member has a different passbook, has an individual passbook where they record their transactions. So savings groups are composed of around 25 to 30 people who come together, pull money in a common fund and borrow from that fund at an interest. So I'll locate savings groups on this continuum, which kind of highlights the level of formalization and also highlights whether it's community or an institutional provider. Institutional providers are usually those that are regulated by a formal authority in that country, and they usually are on the formal side of the continuum, whereas the community-based providers, they are normally unregulated and they're usually on the informal side of the continuum. And we locate savings groups just in the second square under community-based facilitated groups. So what are linkages and why do savings groups seek linkages with formal financial institutions? Now, savings groups operate in a cycle which normally lasts a year. At the beginning of that cycle, when savings activities are beginning, there is little money in the loan fund to meet the credit demands of the members. So in such an instance then, the group needs access to extra credit to supplement the loan fund. Whereas at the end of the cycle, then there is a lot of money in the loan fund as people are paying back the loans, people are saving more. And moreover, towards the end of the cycle, groups stop giving out loans because they're approaching the share out day, the day when they give back people what they've saved, plus the interest earned on the loans. So there's a lot of money in the cash box, which may pose a security threat. So what then that means that the group will need an account at a formal financial institution for security purposes. So we see that savings groups financial linkages are of two forms. Either you're linked for savings or you're linked for credit. We've seen that there are increasing cautionary arguments, theoretical arguments against these linkages and these interventions into savings groups. The arguments that these interventions will weaken the social systems that bind members together, that they will inhibit flexibility and adaptation potential of the groups, and that they will disturb the group dynamics in terms of meeting attendance rate and the dropout rate. But regardless of what we see, there's increasing anecdotal evidence that actually that these linkages are continuing to happen for the savings groups. The biggest of these is the partnership between Barclays Bank as a formal financial institution and two facilitating agencies, Plan International and Care International. And that was between 2009 and 2015. And it was called the Banking on Change Partnership, which saw over 5,000 groups linked to Barclays Bank, either for credit or for savings. Another example is between Mwanga Community Bank and Care International. Care International is a facilitating agency. The Mwanga Community Bank is a formal financial institution. And in this, we saw 1,000 groups linked through this partnership. So we ask ourselves, why is it important? Why is it relevant that we investigate this? First of all, when you look at the sheer numbers, savings groups reach over 20 to 30 million and these are just facilitated groups. They reach over to 20-30 million members, and the numbers are even more if you look at those that spring up spontaneously and are not supported by any facilitating agency. And then also, as of 2016, the savings groups had total assets that were between 430 and $1.2 billion. Moreover, we see increasing government commitment towards using savings groups as conduits for formal financial inclusion. And we see this increasingly, for example, in the financial inclusion strategy of Uganda, where there are clear goals and criteria to implement linkages between VISLAs, which are savings groups, and the formal financial sector. And that is to act as conduits for formal financial inclusion for people that are largely excluded. So then, we've seen that there's increasing financial linkages. However, there is little empirically known about how these linkages influence the performance, dynamics, and the sustainability of these groups. The little that is there is impact evaluations of a particular facilitating agency. For example, Care International conducted an impact evaluation of their linkage efforts in Rwanda. And also Care International still conducted an impact evaluation of their linkage efforts in Niger. But there is really little out there that is empirically vigorous and rigorous to guide policy on the impact of linkages on the savings groups model. And this is where our paper comes in. By answering this research question, how do financial linkages influence savings groups' performance? In answering this question, we make 3 contributions. One is a data and methodological contribution. As I have just noted that most of the studies out there are impact evaluations of a particular efforts of a particular facilitating agency. In this paper, we use a large cross-country panel dataset, arguably the most representative dataset that is available on these informal community-managed savings groups. Moreover, we use a quasi-experimental design to tease out the causal impact of the linkages on the performance of these groups. I'm going to come back to how we define performance just a little bit later. And then the second contribution is we contribute to the growing body of literature on savings groups. There is a lot of literature on savings groups to do with formation of the groups, group membership, and gender. And we see that most of these investigations look at processes internal to the group. And now we come in with a perspective of external influences and specifically financial linkages and how they affect the savings groups model. And then the other contributions in terms of literature on financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is big on the agenda of major economic bodies like the World Bank. And we see that these people that are usually excluded are usually participants in these informal savings groups. So by understanding how linkages to formal financial institutions affect savings groups, we could guide policy on how savings groups can be used as conduits for formal financial inclusions for populations that are largely excluded from the formal financial sector. So going forward to the data that we use, we get this data from the Savings Groups Information Exchange. This is a platform, a database that reports standardized data on community-managed microfinance, and again, it's arguably the most representative that there is on these informal savings groups. Currently, the dataset has over 214,000 savings groups reporting data to this platform, and the platform looks like this. Facilitating agencies have village agents and field officers who visit the groups on a quarterly basis, collect data, and then upload it into the management information system that you can then access online. Going into defining our different measures, for the independent variable, we use financial linkage, which is of 2 forms. Credit linkage, which is 1, if the group has a joint loan facility at a formal financial institution, and 0 otherwise. Then savings linkage, which is 1, if the group has a joint savings account at a formal financial institution, and 0 otherwise. And then for the dependent variables, which is group performance in this case, we use 3 complementary measures. 1 looks at the savings capacity of the members, and that is the savings per member. And then fund utilization rate. It looks at the efficiency with which member savings are converted into loans. And then we also look at the return on savings, which represents the profitability of these groups. When we go forward into the methodology, I will start by discussing the empirical issue that we faced, which is endogeneity, and specifically reverse causality. Now, there is something called the Linkage Readiness Assessment Tool, and this was developed by CARE International but has since been adopted by the different facilitating agencies. Before the groups are linked, or before the facilitating agency recommends linkage for a group, groups are rated on a certain criteria with a number of covariates. And depending on how the group performs on that criteria, the facilitating agency will either recommend linkage or not. So what then this means is that it could be that it is well-performing groups that are eligible for linkage, and hence performance is causing linkage but not linkage influencing performance. How then the traditional solution that we would use for this would be instrumental variables, but we all know that it is usually hard to find valid instruments in such circumstances. So how we confront this is by using a matched sample analysis, whereby we create a reliable counterfactor for the linked groups from the sample of unlinked groups, and then we follow this up by a difference in differences specification. I'll first go into the details of the matching and then later into the difference in differences specification. We use the nearest neighbor Mahalanobis distance matching, and what we want to achieve with this matching is that we have linked groups and we have unlinked groups. So we want to take from the sample of unlinked groups a sample of groups that is as similar as possible to the linked groups along certain covariates or criteria, and we adopt the linkage readiness assessment tool for this purpose. And the criteria we use, when you look at the first three, the facilitating agency, the location, and the country, we do an exact match on these. If the linked group is from Uganda, the unlinked group should be from Uganda. And then the other remaining criteria, we use the group, the unlinked group that has that nearest Mahalanobis distance to the linked group. Our final sample of data pertains to 3,234 savings groups from 31 countries, and it's quarterly information from 2010 to 2017. So we want to first see if the matching has achieved the intended purpose that we wanted to achieve, to make these groups as similar as possible. And for these purposes, we use the difference in means tests, the t-tests. And when you look at the highlighted column, you see that nothing is significant here, which tells us that the linked groups, that there's no statistical difference in the means of the linked groups and the matched controls along these matching criteria. And then we further go and investigate other criteria that we haven't used for matching. And when you look at the highlighted column again, you see that there is nothing that is significant. So what we can conclude from this is that the linked groups are very similar to the unlinked groups, and hence these unlinked groups provide a reliable counterfactor of how the linked groups would have been had they not been linked. So we've achieved the purpose of making the groups as similar as possible. And then we can move on with our multivariate analysis. And for this, we use the difference in differences specification. And we define treatment as financial linkage, which is 1 if the group is linked either through credit or savings and 0 otherwise. Therefore, the treated groups in this case are those that are linked to a form of financial institution, either in the form of savings or credit. And the control groups are those that are not linked. And this is the model that we use. We control for some savings group specific characteristics like the age of the group and the asset size. Then we also control for the agency, time fixed effects. We also include agency, time fixed effects, country, and time fixed effects. And we cluster standard errors at the group level. So let's then look at, and to back up our quantitative investigation, we carried out a qualitative field study in Uganda. We visited 8 groups from 3 different districts and that are supported by 3 different facilitating agencies: Norwegian Association of the Disabled, Care Uganda, and Strome Foundation. And we had interviews and focus group discussions with group members, field officers, and the program managers. And the importance of this qualitative study was to give us more insight into what we were observing from the quantitative analysis. So we can then move on to the results, and I'll start by discussing results pertaining to the savings linkage, which is the first row here that we see. When we look at the savings per member, we see that there's a significant and positive influence of the savings linkage on the savings per member. And we argue that this is due to the security that an account with a formal financial institution provides. It increases a feeling of trust among the members, and that encourages them to save more. And then I'll move on to the return on savings before I return to the fund utilization rate. When you look at the return on savings, we also observe that there's a positive and significant increase in savings, in return on savings for savings linked groups. So Lepolaine and Stark, in their paper in 2018, they found that groups turn savings into credit, not because members are demanding for credit, but just for security reasons. At the end of the meeting, when there is still a lot of money in the cash box, the groups solicit members to take on extra loans just so they can keep the money in the cash box as low as possible for security purposes. What then this means is that they may have to lower the interest rate in order to solicit people to take on these extra loans. But when they have a savings account at a formal financial institution, they then no longer have to solicit members to take on extra loans at lower interest rates, and they then have the liberty to set a high interest rate so that only members who really need the loan can then take the loan. So moving back to the fund utilization rate, we see a decrease in the fund utilization rate for savings linked groups resulting from the savings linkage. And just from the previous explanation I've given, it could be that there's safety in the savings account, so they no longer have to solicit members to take loans that they don't need, hence reducing the fund utilization rate. However, we also argue that there is cost and distance implications in this, because these savings groups are usually located in rural areas, whereas the formal financial institutions are located in urban or peri-urban areas. And so they have to incur costs to take money to the bank and also take money out of the bank. Moreover, there is security threats of moving this money to and from the bank. And in addition to that, there are transaction costs that are incurred when you withdraw money from the formal financial institution. So to keep costs and security and the risk at bay at a low, the groups may decide to limit the number of withdrawals they make from the formal financial institution, and that will ultimately reduce the fund utilization rate. And some of these arguments are backed up by what we see in the field, in the qualitative field investigation. For example, one field officer said the process of taking the money to the bank and then withdraw it when you want to use it is expensive. So I'll then move on to discussing the results pertaining to the credit linkage, and that is the second row of results that we see here. And we see that there is a negative impact, or there is a negative impact resulting from a credit linkage on the savings per member. And here we argue that infusion of external credit into the group reduces the internal savings mobilization drive of the group members. And moreover, it also reduces the sense of ownership. Before it was their money, their savings that was facilitating the group activities. But now there is an external inflow of funds. So that kind of discourages members from saving. And then when you look at the return on savings, we also see still that there is reduction in the return on savings as a result of the credit linkage. And for this, we argue that, first of all, there are costs incurred in terms of interest paid on these borrowed monies. And then savings groups are transparent in that the members observe the agreement you make with a bank in terms of the interest rate, which is usually far less than what is charged internally on member loans in the savings groups. So from a moral perspective, you then can't bring this money in and charge an overly higher interest rate. So that will kind of force them to lower the interest rate just from a moral perspective. And that could explain why we see a reduction in the return on savings. And then interestingly, when you look at the fund utilization rate, we don't see a change as a result of a credit linkage. And yet one would expect that the fund utilization, because the main reason that is fronted for linkages with formal financial institutions is that the groups don't have enough money from member savings to meet demand for credit. So the major reason that is fronted is the credit reason. So you would expect that with external credit, fund utilization will go up. But actually what is happening is that fund utilization is remaining stable, which could be a good thing because it then tells us that whatever money is coming in, like the credit substitutes for the reduced savings per member, and whatever money that is coming in forms of the external credit is actually trickling down to the people, which is a good thing. And the results we see here in the credit linkage, they are resounded in the qualitative investigation that we make. One field officer said from Strome Foundation, if you link them via credit, it will break them. But I want to make a further investigation because when you look at the savings linkage, the fund utilization rate reduces. However, we see an increase in the return on savings, and yet you would expect these two to move in the same direction because loans that are lent out are the ones that bring in returns for members. So what we do is that we investigate further the interest rates of savings linked groups, both before and after linkage. And with this, we do two systematic processes. We take the average interest rate before and after linkage, and then we also take one period, the interest rate one period before linkage, and then also after linkage. And what we find is that actually savings linked groups, there is an increase in the interest rate after the financial linkage, after getting the savings account at the form of financial institution, both when you compare the means and the median tests. So what do we conclude from this? We've seen that savings linkage is generally beneficial for the groups in terms of increased savings per member and the increase in return on savings, but that's achieved at a reduced fund utilization rate. And then we also see that the results of a savings linkage are mainly enjoyed by net savers because now their savings are earning a higher interest rate. However, the net borrowers then have to incur a higher cost in taking out loans. But when we look at the credit linkage, we would argue that it's generally negative effect on group performance, as we've seen in the significant reduction in savings per member and the return on savings. And this study can be improved in several ways. Or further studies can explore more in several ways. First, we look at linkage with a form of financial institution, but we don't really investigate what type of form of financial institution. Is it a bank or is it a microfinance institution that, what will achieve the most optimal outcome for these groups? So further studies can look into exploring linkages between savings groups and specific types of form of financial institutions. And also, further studies can investigate mechanisms through which financial linkages impact social capital among the group members. Thank you.
So in the meantime, let me start off the discussion. So I think I'm more concerned because you talked about women exclusion, but I didn't see anything, referring to maybe a form of gender discrimination in terms of this savings group access and also the credit linkage. So I wouldn't know if you could include this maybe in your further analysis to see probably there is disparities in this access. So apart from the cost and distance location that you stated, so maybe there could be this disaggregation in gender access, and how it also affects linkages. So I didn't see that as one of the variables. So I think so. If you have anything to say about this, maybe considering this or further studies.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's actually a consideration for further studies. It's one of the papers I'm currently looking at. What we see with these savings groups is they are normally made up of, like, for example, in the data set, we have like most groups are 70% female. And some groups are all female actually, and some are mixed, while some are all male. So that's something that I'm considering as a spin-off paper, a third paper that I'm currently working on. So yeah, it's under consideration.
Okay, thank you. So it could also benefit if you see in terms of cost and distance location, probably those that are closer have more advantage than those that are far off, and in terms of cost and the distance. So also, let me just bring up what Dr. Ranjini asked. So she was asking, what are the loans utilized for? She has once conducted some research where people get these loans and use it to buy jewelries or TVs and all that. So she's asking, what are these loans actually utilized for? Are they focused on some particular group of people, or if there's any disparities, or even how the loans are utilized?
Okay. When we conducted the field study, we posed some of these questions to the members. Why do they take these loans? What do they use them for? And most of them, the biggest percentage of them actually say they have small businesses, small, like those side small shops that they use the credit for those businesses. And then another big sample said it's for school fees for their children. So those were the two outstanding reasons. They're small businesses and also school fees for the children.
Okay, so we have one question now, which I'm going to publish for you to see. So, so the question is saying, thanks for the excellent study. I would like to hear more about findings from the complementary qualitative study. How real and practical do SG members find for the linkage?
Thank you so much. What we found is actually that in many cases, and a program officer actually also confessed to this, in many cases it's that these facilitating agencies, the international NGOs that support the groups, they kind of have donor backing, like donor support, to implement linkages between savings groups and the formal financial institution. So for them, it's like a target, ticking off how many groups have been linked. So in many cases, it's not according to what does the group need. But then we also found out from some groups that even if they were told to link by the field officer just to tick off a target, they said no because they didn't find a need for it. Because we asked them, why aren't you linked to a formal financial institution? And they would say, because we didn't find a need for it, even if they told us to seek such linkages. So it's both ways, but the biggest percentage is that it's mainly influenced by the facilitating agency just to tick off some kind of targets for the donor backing and stuff. But there are also some genuine groups that actually seek out these linkages themselves without even asking the facilitating agency. They go straight to the formal financial institution. So it's two categories.
Okay, so there's a raised hand here. Russell Madara from Sokoy University of Agriculture. And also a question from me. So we talk about the question first. So he's saying, why have you used Uganda for a qualitative study? Your study focuses on so many countries with different contexts, and a single country cannot justify that.
Yeah, I agree it cannot justify that, but actually the main methodology for this study is the quantitative investigation, the differences in differences investigation. And the focus on Uganda is just a convenience sampling because I come from Uganda, and then we had a field visit with the team to Uganda, and it was just a convenience sample of groups in Uganda. So, and the qualitative study is not like justification for the whole study and for the reasons that we pose, but it's just an additional understanding of the insights that we see from the main methodology, which is the quantitative investigation. So it's a small bit of the paper to justify some of the things we see. And yeah, for further studies, actually, someone can conduct a totally, for example, from the further studies I said, to understand how linkages influence the social capital, someone can conduct a totally qualitative investigation and use different cases from different countries to understand how, for example, different country dynamics influence, such phenomena.
The University of Ibadan, Nigeria. I'll be presenting a research topic that has been categorized under panel P47. Proceed to the next slide. My research topic says, effects of agricultural cooperatives on credit access and marketing services of farmers in Edo local government area, Oyo State, Nigeria. Please proceed to the next slide. This research topic will be discussed under the following highlights: introduction, literature review, methodology, results and discussion, conclusion, recommendation. Next slide, please. Now to the introduction, background of the study. Agriculture, main employing sector. In Nigeria, agriculture employs about 2/3 of the total labor force population. It also provides a livelihood for majority of the rural population. Agricultural cooperatives are agricultural producer-owned cooperatives. Now, the emphasis here is on producers of agricultural output, not the consumers. What these cooperatives do is that their primary purpose is to ensure that they provide a better link with finance, with agricultural information, agricultural input and output markets for these members in order to increase their level of production and consequently increase their income. Problem statement: underdevelopment. Nigeria is characterized by underdevelopment with a Human Development Index of 0.527, which ranks Nigeria as number 152 amongst 188 United Nations member states. Now, in a bid to ameliorate this situation, the federal government has embarked on various policies, part of which we have the agricultural policies. However, research has shown that a lot of these agricultural policies have failed in achieving their set goals. This could be attributed to poor organizational structure and implementation at the grassroots level, as opined by Omotosho in study 2007. Despite the roles played by cooperative societies at the grassroots level, it is still observed that in Nigeria, majority of the farmers operate in subsistence class, especially in this study area, and this is the reason why this research was carried out. Next slide, please. Under introduction, we have our objectives. The main aim of this study is to assess the effects of agricultural cooperatives on credit access and marketing services of farmers in the study area, from which we have those objectives outlined. Next slide, please. Justification of the study. Agricultural development is constrained by a myriad of factors. We have land fragmentation problem, we have inadequate skills, knowledge, and technical know-how. We have insufficient financial resources, amongst several others. This research work serves two purposes. The first is academic purpose. It has helped to add to existing body of knowledge. And the second is that it has also helped in creating awareness about agricultural cooperatives among the inhabitants. The hypothesis tested in this study is agricultural cooperatives have positive effects on credit access and marketing services of the farmers. Please proceed to the next slide. Now let's look at the literature review. I have here theoretical framework. The research focused on institutional economics. According to Royal 1999, cooperatives focus on institution and institutional constraints rather than profit-maximizing behavior of abstract firms in the neoclassical economic paradigm. Economics in recent times have developed three distinct but related methods to analyze organizational forms. We have the transaction cost exchange. This explains the cost of transacting and exchanging. We also have the agency theory. This explains agency relationships. That is, you having somebody known as the agent, and in this case, the managers of the cooperative groups acting on behalf of somebody called the principal, and in this case, the members of the cooperative groups. We have the property rights analysis. As defined by themselves, it is the capacity to control or to use an asset or a resource. For you to have a workable human form of cooperation, there has to be clearly defined property rights. Modern day cooperatives could be said to be based on the Rochdale Pioneers Bible of Cooperatives, which we also call the Rochdale Pioneers Principle of Cooperatives. Proceed to the next slide. I have here my methodological framework. In this study, I made use of the Tobit regression model, which is a model that is used in estimating your equation when you have a continuous dependent variable. I have my logic regression model, which is used in estimating your equation when you have a dichotomous dependent variable. And I have my principal component analysis. It is a statistical procedure that is used in converting a set of possibly related variables into principal components. Next slide, please. Empirical review. In Ojiako and Obukwa's study, they made use of correlation and regression technique, and it showed that farm credits played significant role in transformation of rural economies. In Adefila's study in 2012, he made use of regression technique, and it was discovered that duration and type of cooperatives were found to be significant. Nkechi et al. 2015 in their study made use of ordinary least square in testing the impact of socioeconomic characteristics of these members and some variables related to cooperative societies on income. Next slide, please. Now to the methodology. The study area in this study is Ido Local Government Area of Oyo State. It was created on May 29 and it ranked 14th by size. It has an area of 986 square kilometers and a population of 103,261 persons. The people there are predominantly Yoruba people, and the area is fertile, and so majority of them are farmers. Primary data was used in this study. Questionnaires were administered to 100 respondents. We adopted the multi-stage random sampling technique. The first stage involved random selection of 3 towns out of 4 towns. The second stage involved a purposive selection of cooperative group, while the third stage involved random selection of members from these cooperative groups. Please proceed to the next slide. Under methodology, we have the data analysis. Descriptive statistics and cross-tabulation were used in profiling the socioeconomic characteristics of these farmers across the types of agricultural cooperatives. Principal component analysis was used in deriving an index for the marketing services, while Tobit's regression technique was used in analyzing the effects of agricultural cooperatives on marketing services. Logic regression technique was used in analyzing the effects of agricultural cooperatives on credit access. Now to the results and discussion. Please proceed to the next slide. The socioeconomic characteristics, as shown in the slide beside me, shows that majority of these respondents were the following. While majority of the cooperative groups that were sampled also showed the following characteristics. Please proceed to the next slide. Services rendered. Majority of the services rendered by these cooperative groups include credit facilities and rural development, while the least service rendered are guidance and counseling, grading and assemblage of commodities. Next slide, please. Effect on marketing services. 7 out of 15 variables were found to be significant, and they are outlined there. However, farming experience, quoted in green color, shows that it had a negative relationship. And this could be as a result of the fact that as farmers get older, their minds get opposed to new marketing ideas and services. Please proceed to the next slide. Effects on credit access. 5 out of 12 variables were found to be significant. Inability to repay loans promptly is the only variable that was negatively related. And this means that those who were unable to repay their loans promptly could not get access subsequently to credits from the cooperative groups. Next slide, please. Challenges. Some of these cooperative societies are faced with no support from government agents, transportation challenges, compulsory exorbitant dues, holding meetings that are time consuming. Next slide, please. Conclusion. This study has affirmed that there are effects of agricultural cooperatives on credit access and marketing services of these farmers. The major service provided is credit facilities. Cooperative societies are faced with various challenges. Please proceed to the next slide. Lastly, recommendation. Farmers are encouraged to join cooperative societies. Cooperatives and other concerned agents should enlighten and educate these farmers, especially concerning marketing their services. Members of cooperative groups should ensure to be punctual at meetings and adhere to other rules stipulated by these cooperative groups. Government at all levels should be interested in the formulation and administration of these cooperatives through the related agencies. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so my presentation is on collective action, and I seek to talk about collective action in activities going on in the management of crop pests and diseases in rural farming in Ghana, but not the entire country, but I have a case in context. Please, can you move to the next slide for me? So crop pests and diseases affect farming all over the world. It's a global challenge, but currently there are contributing or multiple stresses that are increasing or affecting farming in the world, including farmers in Ghana. In this case, we talk about climate change, intense temperature, increasing intensive rainfall or water stress conditions. And currently, of course, we have an increasing record of transboundary pest and disease condition like the fall armyworm, and reduce resilience of the farming system because due to intensive crop practices. And in view of that, the issue of the incidence of crop pests and diseases are increasing continually in farming or affecting farming, smallholder farming sector, including, of course, the large-scale farmers as well. Now, in the treatment or management of crop pests and diseases in Ghana currently is focused on integrated pest management, like the use of chemicals, crop rotation, and so on. And it's also based on top-down extension advisory services and the application of pharmacists' own knowledge. So, and I'm curious to understand in this study, how do collective action plays a role in the management of crop pests and diseases currently in rural farming sector in Ghana. And the idea is to understand its role, whether it's currently existing, what is its state, and in what form is this collective action taking place. So that is my aim in this presentation. The next slide. So to do that, I operationalize three main theories. First, I talk about knowledge. When we say knowledge, knowledge is about information and skill that someone or a group of people acquired over the years or through education. So in this case, I try to categorize knowledge into four main areas: knowledge, know why, know what, know who, and know how. Now, when you read further, Nanoka and co tries to explain that knowledge exists in two ways. With respect to these four categories, it can be explicit knowledge, like you gain knowledge through education. Someone comes to conduct a workshop for you, teaches you how to apply a chemical. And also we gain knowledge through tacit, or we call it tacit knowledge, where through experience, you have been doing something and over you learn from it and it becomes knowledge. But this tacit knowledge is embedded within. It is not something that is expressed, it is codified, or it can be found in a book. But at the end of the day, through experience, through interaction, through flow of information, that explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge can intertwine and become a practice. So I explained through Chauvel's theory that practice is a combination of competence, your skill, your routine things you do every day, and of course it comes with combination of materials and the meaning attached. So as we are here, everyone is undergoing, is carrying out certain practices, whether knowingly or unknowingly, but it is reproduced and reenacted. But at the end of the day, something new comes out and it continues. And I explain collective action as an act where one or two actors are required to contribute to an effort in order to achieve an aim. So in collective action, it can be a farmer group, it can be a smallholder women group association, or something that of course, the aim is to deal with a public bad. And this presentation is done in the context. I didn't know that we'll have this coronavirus. I use the case of coronavirus as a public bad. Once one person is affected, it affects another person, and it affects the entire society. The same happens with crop pests and diseases. Once a particular farm is affected, the next or the entire community is affected by a specific crop pest or disease. So this context or this situation that we are facing globally, it gives an example of how we are supposed to deal with crop pests and diseases in the sense of coming or collective action, using collective action approach. So this is the aim or the approach that I sought to operationalize my study. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so my study is conducted or was conducted in Ada East District, and the aim is to carry out this study in vegetable growing areas in Ghana where intensive farming is carried out. They cultivate mostly tomato, pepper, watermelon, onion for the urban market in Accra. So farming is ongoing continuously throughout the year. They do not have any break, or there isn't any seasonal break in the farming context in the Adan East District in the Greater Accra region in Ghana. Now, to conduct this study, I used interview qualitative study approach. I used interview, participated in farmer community meetings, field visit with the extension officers, and participation, and also went to do field observation. So I was part of the team and observed firsthand, not depending only on information from the interview. So these were my sources of data for the study. Next slide. Now, and in the Ada East District, yeah, as a farming community, it is expected that various diseases or crop pests would affect the farming sector. But with my study through the interview, I found out that there are 5 main key crop pests and diseases that affect the farming sector in the Ada East District, irrespective of the season. And interesting enough, for farmers, they do not have what we call they do not know the English name, but they have a collective name which they give to the diseases. So on my slide, the first one is tomato, or it's a major crop pest disease which affects tomato or watermelon or pepper, is a leaf miner. Now, instead of them to give a scientific name, or there's no one, so per their experience and based on the symptoms of the disease, they give the name, for that matter, the leaf miner, they give the name Arabic, because based on the symptom, it has certain features that appears on the leaf. Now, in the case of tomato, we have tomato spotted wilted virus, and they call it Ebola. It's a communal name. So when you go to the community and you mention tomato spotted virus, no one knows it. But when you mention the name Ebola, it's recognized, and the meaning attached to, and so in this case, then I come in with my theory of practice. The meaning attached to the practice of giving local name is in the sense that they try to mimic the behavior of the pest or the diseases, and then give it a communal name that people can relate to. And we all understand how Ebola Ebola disease, when one person is affected, it affects the entire community. And the same with tomato spotted virus. They explain that once a particular farm, or once a particular plant or crop is affected, it affects the entire farm, leading to the entire community. So they gave it Ebola. Then another common disease which I found is with watermelon, which affects watermelon, was watermelon pouch disease, and they gave it the name Co as the common collective name. And then another one is the fall armyworm. The common name is Gogo. And the onion, it was affected mostly by the onion twister. instead of them to mention onion twister, again, they have a communal name, which they call it Osama, meaning it's a very wicked, if I should put it in quotes, a very wicked disease, which when it affects the onion plant, everything is gone. So it tells you that rural community pick meanings and names from the wider social context and ascribe it to whatever disease or pest condition that is affecting their crops in their villages in the context of my study area. The next slide. Now, I wanted to know about the know-how of the diseases. Do farmers actually have any idea of what affects, or how is this crop pest? What is it about? Do they know the scientific name and so on? And so I asked them, what is your knowledge about the cause of this disease? It's interesting that most farmers do not know about whether the disease is a fungi, it's a virus, or it's a bacteria. All they know is some of them know about the life cycle of the pest, or they can describe some of the symptoms at a particular stage, but talking about how it starts and so on, this is not a complete knowledge that farmers can talk about, most of them. And farmers provided different explanations when it comes to the causal agents of the disease. So for example, when we talk about the tomato spotted virus or the leaf miner, it's an insect which lays eggs on the leaf of the plant. But this cannot be explained. But when it comes to the symptoms, they are very good as a community to explain that when they see a leaf miner, it shows that there are certain features or lines that are drawn on the leaf of a tomato plant, but they are unable to explain exactly what causes such things. Now, in the same vein, talking about the causes, some farmers are able to ascribe abiotic conditions to the occurrence of the pests and diseases. For example, some would say that Ebola came into the community. When I say Ebola in this case, I'm referring to the tomatoes spotted world virus, which they call Ebola. They told me that it came through a heavy rainstorm and it came to stay in the community. And some of them would say that, okay, when we have the fall armyworm, then there's so much heat in our environment, and that is the cause of it. So there are, of course, when you listen to the explanation and you get into the scientific know why, or the cause, or the scientific cause, you realize that yes, there are some relationship between their tacit knowledge or local experiences, and there's the scientific explanations that they are giving, but it doesn't give a complete overview of the causes of the occurrence of crop pest diseases in the farming sector in my study area. Now, I talked about the next slide, please. Then the knowledge about the spread of the pests and diseases. Majority of the farmers did not know about the mechanism for the spread of the crop pests and diseases. For example, some farmers do not know that perhaps if they have a contaminated farm too, it can also affect or lead to, because for example, some farmers have 2 farms or 3 farms. They farm in the north, the other sector of the village. So if one farm has perhaps, for example, a virus, and they have gone to till the soil and so on, and the tools are contaminated, they are unaware that yes, they are virtually transferring the pathogen to the other farm. Of course, they are aware that when it comes to certain diseases, it is waterborne or airborne, but to the extent that they would know that, okay, certain farm practices like the farm tools and so on can be a mode with which they can transfer the disease from one farm to the other. It is less known among the farming community. But there's high knowledge on the transfer of the pests and diseases from one community to another, especially the watermelon patch. So some farmers say that they all in a particular village, they wait until they all start sowing seeds in May instead of, then other communities also say that they come together in the earlier part of January. They have a date they all set out to start sowing because they know that the whatever disease that affect the watermelon can be transferred through airborne into other farms. Now, so in this context, village A would always say that when their farm is affected, it is because after the rain, the disease traveled through the storm from village B to village A. So then there's a contestation of the source of the disease, but not coming in collectively to say that, okay, we're all going to, as a village in the district, we're all going to start cultivating, farming our seeds at a particular time. Now, I talked about, but there was none of the farmers mention the spreading mechanism and maybe as the symptomless spreading mechanism. Because of course, then as I indicated in my first slide, if you knew the life cycle and you knew whether it is a pathogen or a bacteria, then you will be able to know how it starts and when to halt the spread. But this knowledge is less known among farmers. So these are some of the know-how and know-why knowledge about the spread of the disease. Can you move to the next slide, please? So I continue to find out from farmers about the what of the selected crops, know what, that is the knowledge about, and majority of the farmers reported to know the crop pests and diseases with little knowledge about their scientific name, as I have indicated in my first slide. Majority of the farmers know about the seasonal cycle. So for the watermelon, for example, the watermelon pulch, they know that during the main season, this disease is very abundant, but of course, they always expect it, instead of dealing with it head on, every season, it occurs every year and every season during the main rainfall season, which is from April to July. Now, farmers recognize certain symptoms when it occurs on the leaf, when, like, for example, the leaf miner. And of course, for example, if the fall armyworm has devastated the entire farm, they are able to know. But of course, then when it comes to knowing about this disease, then we have categories of, for example, the armyworm. Some would, whether it is fall armyworm or is the armyworm or a stem borer, everything is just categorized as a worm for most of the farmers. And when it comes to yellowing of the leaf, sometimes they assume that, for example, if there's no rain in the main season, maybe at a stage from May to June, they assume that, oh, it is just water stress. And when you delve further and investigate, you realize that it's rather a bacterial that is affecting the plants at that point. So it becomes too late at a stage to correct or to intervene in the loss of the crops on the farm. And of course, then it leads to the transfer of the disease from the starting point to other farms and then to other communities. Now, can we move to the next slide? The management method. And when it comes to the management method, this is where I am interested to know whether there are collective actions that are taking place. When, of course, I explained that when I say collective action, one or two people coming together as a group to deal with the situation head on. But I found that, interestingly, the management methods are individual approaches. For example, Rogan, that is when they see an affected plant and they are sure that this is a plant that is affected by any of the diseases that I've mentioned, they pull it, uproot it, and throw it away. But one method, one thing, this is good, but the effect is that they are supposed to, normally the ideal strategy is to uproot and and burn it or bury it, but they uproot it and throw it by the side of the or at the boundary of the farm. So in that case, they are not helping situation. It's like you dealing with something but not dealing with it fully. So of course, if it's lying by the boundary of the farm, the next farm is just adjacent to the other person, the affected farm. An application of chemical is one of the dominant practice that I found. Once they identify that there's a situation or they suspect that the symptoms are caused by any of the diseases I have mentioned, then they start applying chemicals. Now, in this case, because they are not sure exactly what is wrong or what disease it is, they try to combine the chemicals. They buy the fungicide and buy this one and combine and spray. So it's like a trial and error approach just to see which one works. And of course, once it works, they recommend it to their other colleagues that, okay, I combine this chemical, I combine, for example, they have local names for the chemicals as well. Instead of using the scientific name, they have generated their own communal names for the chemicals. So they can say, I use attack, I use this, and I combine it and I sprayed and it worked. So then it becomes a recommendation, but of course it doesn't deal with the same, the recommendation does not help in dealing with the disease, because on the other farm, perhaps that was a leaf miner, and the other farm, his condition is a different thing altogether, or a different form of virus, or the mutation of the bacteria or the virus. But then once a person tries an approach and it works for them, it is spread across. And then few farmers mention cultural practices like planting of quality seed and decontamination of the farm tools. And when it comes to crop rotation, yes, it is done, but because of the intensive cultivation of crops to meet demands for the market, sometimes the fallow period is just 2 weeks, or the maximum is one season. So when we say one season, it's like 3 months. That's a 3 month, that's a maximum period. So even if there's a disease and you want to treat it using deal with it, even using the crop rotation or approach, the fallow period is just too short to help deal with it. And those who even claim that they cultivate quality seeds, the aim or the motive for buying the store, they use the word store seed, that I mean the improved seed, is not purposely to deal with the disease or so, but is to buy quality seed to get early fruits to harvest and also get a lot of yields. So for example, if someone says, I bought this variety and it gave me a lot of harvest, then that is the reason why a farmer is going to buy a seed, an improved seed from the agri shop or the agrochemical shop. But not, the aim is not purposely to deal with the crop pest or disease, of course, but this plays a role. And in the last point, when farmers have used their own knowledge, their own skill and everything, they try their own method and it doesn't work, that is when they approach the extension officer. And so by then, when the extension officers also suggest their management method, you realize that it is too late. So some farmers even lose their entire tomato farm or entire watermelon farm, because when the condition started, they didn't know about it. And when they spotted the virus, or sorry, the symptoms, they tried their own method. And when it's just beyond their control, this is when they approach the extension officers. Can you move to the next slide, please? All right. So, and this slide is talking about how farmers combine their scientific and local methods. And in this case, I talk about different application of strategies. Like I indicated in the former slide, they combine chemicals. Some also treat the diseases on their own. They read, some of them cannot read, but they look at the prescriptions that have been written on the containers of the agrochemicals and try their own methods. They try their own dosage. They try how to do it. Some spray their farms with different chemicals at different rates just to remedy the situation. And the treatments were carried out on individual basis. So it's like we are all dealing with a tomato spotted virus, or we are all dealing with a watermelon pouch, or we are all dealing with a particular condition on our farm. But each one has his or her own approach of doing it, and the one whose approach works best, then inform the others. Of course, once that is done, it doesn't mean that the other person's farm is saved anyway, because then the conditions differ. Next slide. Now, I looked at what are the leadership approaches in emerging in dealing with this situation, that is crop pest disease conditions that I'm describing in my study area. So first of all, I found the farmer-to-farmer approach, which I have been discussing all over, is one of the key approach, but it is individual-led, individual-based. The agricultural extension agents are also there, but then it works this way. They have an operational approach where they work through lead farmers. So the extension hears of an outbreak of a particular disease, then he calls a lead farmer for a workshop or for a field demonstration, and the expectation is that the lead farmer will also inform the other farmers in his or her farm. But there's a challenge with this form of leadership approach, because at the end of the day, it's a community. The spread of the information and the spread of virus is, or the disease condition or the pest like the fall armyworm, is on a different rate. The lead farmer is supposed to try the approach that has been taught at the workshop, and if it works, before he informs the other farmers. So by then, the spread or whatever havoc that is supposed to occur might have happened already. Now, the input buyers, input dealers, currently more agrochemicals are established, whether they are registered or not. They are established in rural villages, and their aim is to sell chemicals to farmers. So once farmers approach them, they don't know what condition exactly the farmer is explaining, but because they are also in to do business, they quickly prescribe that the farmer should try this chemical, try this, and see. So this, and of course, once it works, farmers have trust. Now, currently, they have this sort of trust in the agrochemical sellers. Others too don't trust them based on their previous experience. He will tell you that he prescribed this, it didn't work, I have wasted my money. So there are different approaches to, or different trusts that are ascribed to a chemical dealer. If he prescribes a medicine, or sorry, a chemical, and it works, then farmers will trust that person. But if it doesn't work, then the trust in that leader at that point is lost. And so now, of course, and then the third point, or the fourth point, is the emerging role of plant clinic, sponsored by CABI and some donor organizations. They try to train the extension officer who holds plant clinics. So when farmers have affected plants, they hold sometimes once a month. You uproot the affected plant, they bring it to the community clinic, they diagnose it, and then prescribe a medicine, or sorry, a chemical for you. And then you go and try it. If it works, fine. And then, of course, the farmer workshop approach is also ongoing, but these are done once a period, or once in a season. So, of course, these approaches are really less. So, in this sense, the more prominent leaders are the farmer-to-farmer meetings, or face-to-face meeting, and the input dealers. And then the third comes in as the extension agents, who is also a leading actor in helping to deal with crop pests and diseases. But at the end of the day, these approaches are still individual based, and it doesn't help to deal with the disease from a collective point of view, or saying that let us all come together and do it at this point, let us pray at this at a specific time, let us deal with this condition in a particular way as a community. It's just individual pockets of strategies that are dealt, that are implemented, and what works is spread across. Next slide. So more or less, this is my second to last slide. I have also identified that beside the human leadership that are emerging, ICT or digital platforms are emerging to also lead in dealing with crop pests and diseases. For example, I mentioned the Isoko platform. Isoko platform is an ICT-based organization, sort of where they have a call center, SMS message. They give information about weather, about the pest and market prices. So farmers who have the numbers would be able to call them, or Isoko also give alert that there's going to be a pest or fall armyworm outbreak in this particular community. So farmers should take the initiative to prepare ahead. And we have a WhatsApp extension WhatsApp page. When a farmer reports, when a farmer reports a particular pest and disease condition on the farm, all they do is that they tell the extension officer, and the extension officers have an informal platform where they discuss the condition. Maybe extension officer goes to the field, take a picture, bring it to the WhatsApp page, and they discuss as a group. Tell the farmer, for example, I quote, they would say, discuss that, tell the farmer to try this approach, to try this chemical. If it doesn't work, tell the farmer to try the second approach. So these are discussed on the page and then related to the farmers through mobile phones or field visit again on how they should go about it. And then we have the e-agriculture extension platform where farmers can also call to ask for advice. And then the internet, I found some young farmers who sometimes tell me that they Google some of the conditions, especially those who are educated. They find the internet to be another source where they can get information on how to treat the crop pests and disease. And the mobile phone calls, some call communities in other districts to find out whether they are going through certain conditions or similar, they are experiencing similar things in their farm, and then they also get information. But one challenge with this digital platform, which I have found, is that it is still not a collective dealing with the situation in a collective way, because at the end of the day, for example, the Isoko platform in this case works with farmers who can call. So if the farmer is able to call, then fine. If the farmer is not able to call, then then they don't get information. Or they even deal with farmers who have been sponsored by an agent or to give information to a specific farmer group of farmers. So if a farmer has to spend his call credit to call the Isoko platform to get his information, it becomes a price that he or she has paid. So it's like, I have paid the price to get information. So he doesn't really spread or give the information to the other farmers. It's like, if you also need the information, you should call them. So it doesn't help so much in dealing with the crop pest disease condition on the farm in a collective way as they are supposed to do. And I've already explained about the lead farmer and then the extension situation. It takes time for information to get to the community because of trust issue. He has to work on the recommendation. If it works before he would tell other farmers, because farmers are such that issues like this deals with trust. The information has to be trusted. Have you tried it? Have you tried the approach? If you have not tried it, then you shouldn't tell the other farmer about it. So people have to try their own remedies before they tell their colleagues. By then, the whatever issue or whatever damage that is supposed to occur on the farm had already started. Next slide, the last slide, of course. So in my study, I found out, to conclude, I found that in dealing with crop pests and diseases, my reflection is that there's less information. That is the cause. What is it exactly? What is fall armyworm? What is onion twister? What is tomato spotted wilt virus? If a farmer knows this, has this knowledge, and knows the life cycle of the pathogen, then it's easy to deal with some of these things. And of course, there's more focus on management strategies than on the causal agent and spreading mechanism. So the management strategies mostly also deals with the application of the agrochemicals, and not on cultural practices, not on coming together as collective to deal with the disease, but it's all on individual recommendation and approaches. Formation of farmer groups is dependent on an external agent. If an external agent comes in to say, let's form a group and so on and deal with this disease, fine. But once an external agent is invisible, farmers are unable to come together as collective to deal with it head on. And of course, they have the frequency of consultation with the extension agent is less than consulting of the input dealers. They have more trust in the input dealer because the input dealer has the chemical to give to them to deal with the situation. Of course, when you have your 1 acre of farm, which may be small, but it's so much investment for a rural farmer who is desperate to deal with the disease, he cannot depend on an extension agent whose remedy takes time, who has to discuss with the group as a team, and so on. He needs a solution now. And then I also mentioned about financial challenges. In one of the communities, they discuss that they plan to spray the farm on a particular date, but some farmers are not able to follow or comply because, of course, they don't have money to buy the chemical at the set date. So when one farmer A does the spraying, farmer B's farm has not been done. So eventually, the fall armyworm moves back or is spread back again in the community because of one or two people. So there's a collective action challenge, and Ostrom in this case talks about and setting up rules to punish people who do not comply. But how do you punish someone who says he doesn't have money to buy a chemical to spray the farm on a set date? Then I reflect also on collective action were really effective due to breakdown on existing collective platforms such as farmer groups. It is inexistent. It is very loose these days. And the culture of information sharing is gradually losing out because of competition for market and intensification of farming. So whereas formerly, they used to discuss issues as a community, these days individualism is creeping into the communities. People want to deal with things on their own, and if it works, some even keep quiet and do not want to share how they are success because they want to they need market. They want to be the first to enter the market. I use their word. They want to be the first to be able to sell their goods in the market. So you realize that the social fabric is also breaking down in terms of how formerly some rural communities used to deal with issues in a collective way. So I said there's no collective institution, rules binding pharmacists' behavior. That is overall what I see. There's no rule. Everyone is free to do things because it's an open society. So you can do things, or you can decide to share information if you like, or you keep it to yourself. And those who are willing to share would always want to deal with the condition and find the solution that it works before they tell others. On this note, I would say that I conclude by saying, that's the last slide, sorry. The last slide, I conclude by saying that I found that there's lack of awareness of collective nature of the identified pests and diseases. There's lack of knowledge, because if they knew, or as global, we all know that corona is a public bad and we are all trying to deal with it in a collective way globally, then society or the farming communities that I work with would be able to also tackle these diseases, crop pest diseases head on. But this awareness is low. So of course, so people are dealing with it individually. And actors tend to be uncoordinated. Farmers do not know explicitly that they are faced with a collective management challenge. So on this note, I thank you for your attention and for listening to my presentation. And I welcome questions on this presentation. My challenge is, how do we leverage on the emerging leadership, which I discussed, the ICT or digital platform, to be used as collective platforms to help in pushing collective action agendas. Thank you very much for your attention.
I must say it's a very interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, very interesting presentation. So I'll open up the discussion floor.
Okay.
Then please, if you have any question, you can put it in the group chat. You can send in your question for Rebecca to answer. So I think I like the aspect of social fabric, breaking down
Yeah.
the problem of collective leadership, especially in this case where the crop pest disease cannot be controlled individually.
Exactly.
It has to be through a collective action. So I was saying that I'm thinking that when we talk about social fabric, like social constructs, that gender could also be an important, you know, an important factor constraining this collectivity.
Yeah.
So do you not think that, for example, in terms of funding and maybe the women farmers do not have access to funding, to spray chemicals, that could also be limiting. And also, when we look at social constructs like, you know, individual pocket level in terms of money, poverty could also be a
Yeah.
problem in
Yeah.
collectivity, so also having access to some of these digital platform
Yes.
or could also mean that farmer have a particular level of education, and some people do not have that level to control using digital platform. So I would say that maybe if did you look at all these aspects, how they have actually hindered
Okay.
collectivity in this
Okay.
case.
Thank you very much for that insightful question. And for example, you mentioned the issue about gender constraining collectivity. And I say that it's prominent because the lead farmers whom the extension officers engage with are mostly men. And of course, they are mostly men. The lead farmer is supposed to be someone who is a progressive farmer, who is educated, who has. I mean, the selection is based on certain criteria. So eventually, most of the lead farmers whom the extension officers or any of these funding agents and ISOCO interact with are people who have large skills, maybe 4 acres of farm, male farmers, of course, I don't want to use the word people, male farmers who have access to certain resources, who are educated, who are described as progressive farmers. They are contacted. So in this case, women in the first place are out of the discussion. And of course, when it comes to the use of chemical, we talk about who is going to spray. Most of the women depend, those who have the farm, they depend on a male labor to do the spraying for them, or their husband to do the spraying. So that her husband will have to finish with his tasks on his farm to do that. And I vividly recall one of the interview where one woman said it's because of that he has stopped cultivating okra, because the army worm affects the okra farm. So meanwhile, okra farm, the cultivation of okra brings a lot of money, but she cannot afford to spray the farm. And if she does, she can only contract a male laborer at a time. And so you realize, of course, some of these social fabric issues that you have brought in are really evident. And of course, poverty, which I have mentioned in the slide earlier on, is evident. Some women, mostly women, told me categorically that they don't go into certain crop because of these conditions, these key 5 disease pest conditions I've mentioned. So they are limited to the cultivation of cassava and crops that will not fetch them money. And of course, education, access to make phone, to even have a phone and call this platform, Isoko platform, to call them, they deduct from your call credit. So why, if I don't have money, why should I even call such a outlet to get information? So it's these are some of the things, but I thank you for bringing them up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So there is a question here from Philip Adley from SOAS University of London. So I'm just going to publish it for you to see.
Okay.
So you see, do you know why existing farmer groups or collective platform failed in the past? And what do you think are the prospects for cooperation in the future?
I would say the talking to the extension agent, they indicated that when there is an external sorry, I have to write the prospect for the future. Yeah. Okay. When there is an external agent, for example, if I come in to conduct a research and I come into the community, there's this sort of, once I'm bringing in funding and all this sort of approach, it's upheld by the farmers. But once the external agent walks out, for them to continue, it becomes difficult. So there are farmer groups, but it is loose. When I say loose, they barely meet, they barely coordinate, they barely have their meetings and so on. So I go in to initiate a program of this sort where I form farmer groups and so on. But the idea is that I do this for 1 year and pull out so that they can carry on. I use the word carry on, continue with it. But once the external actor, even the extension agent, walks out, then they are unable to coordinate. And I see some of these things again as the causes, some of the social issues that we are talking about. Yes, of course, if we are in a group and some people are more wealthy, some people, those who are wealthy, have voice, then what is the essence of me being in a group? Then there's power play and so on. So these social fabric or social issues also eat into the strength, or takes away the strength of the group formation. But if the power play, the power balance, and accessibility to information or access to contribute in the group is equalized, then a poor farmer, a woman will find motivation to go for farmer group meeting. But if I will go for a meeting as a woman who is a farmer and I cannot say anything, then why do I have to waste my time to go there in the first place? I hope you understand. So going forward in the future, I think it has to be about empowerment, education. And when I go back again, I will use this coronavirus as an issue. For example, it's a very strong issue that if you don't deal with this, and it becomes a cyclical issue that every season you have to deal with it. So it's about education. It's about talking to farmers about the starting point of these conditions on the farm. Then they get to understand that if we don't tackle it well, it will not eliminate in our community, because for all the workshops I've witnessed and I've participated in, it's all about the management approach and less on the dealing about the causes, less about teaching on what exactly is causing the situation and why collective action is needed. Because if that is not clarified and if people are not empowered to know that, then they will not find reason to start in the first place. So that's my response.
Okay, thank you very much. it's more like I'm speaking with myself. Like I get to confirm if anybody could hear me. So the presentation is on the roles of social networks in adoption of climate smart agricultural practices among rural farm households in Nigeria. The presentation was made by Maria Ogunaike, Mojisola Kende, and Fumini Oyawale from the Department of Agricultural Economics and Farm Management, Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta. So the introduction of their presentation, according to their presentation, they defined they claim social networks are usually based on trust and commitment and are important in the farm household's decision-making process on adoption of new innovation. Then that social networks also serve as technical, moral, and financial support centers for small older farmers. Climate change presents a great development challenge for the global community in general, and particularly for smallholder farming households in developing countries. Then the continuation of the introduction. Smallholder agriculture has a vital role to play for future food supply. It is the most dominant sector, forming about 80% of the global land, and that's supplying 60% of the staple food in the world. That's according to FAO 2008 report. And despite its role, the majority of smallholder farmers suffer from food insecurity and poverty due to excessive reliance on traditional, nature-dependent, and low-productive agriculture. Introduction continues. Climate smart agriculture is one strategy aiming to help farmers adopt more sustainable farming practices. And despite low adoption rates, empirical evidence supports that adoption of soil and water conservation is crucial in reducing exposure to weather shock and increasing food insecurity. Furthermore, studies indicate a higher potential benefit of adoption for the most vulnerable farm households. That's according to the report of Dilfaco et al. 2011. So the objective of the study, according to these researchers, they said the study looked at adoption of climate smart practices and the role of social networks in the process. And the subsequent objective, the specific objectives are to identify determinants and barriers affecting farming household adoption of climate smart agricultural practices in Nigeria, and secondly, to explore how social learning and networks contribute to knowledge and decision making during adoption of climate smart agricultural practices in Nigeria. The research methodology. Multi-stage sampling technique was used to select 521 rural farm households across 5 states in Nigeria. And this methodology made use of primary data, which collected information on socio-economic and cultural activities among rural farm households and social networks, and adopted, and I think that households that adopt climate smart agricultural practices used on cultivated parcels using a structured questionnaire. And data were also analyzed using the main and multivariate probability model. So the result and discussion. From these results, the second column shows the mean, while the third column shows the standard deviation of their results. This table gives a descriptive statistics of the explanatory variables. So we have the age of household head, sex of household head, household size, access to markets, access to extension services, and other explanatory variables. So from the summary statistics, the summary statistics of the major variables used for the regression analysis is given in table 1. That was the table preceding this slide. Then our dependent variable, that's their dependent variable, include adoption of climate smart practices, such as use of compost, crop rotation, minimum tillage, and agroforestry. And in their study, in the study area, 63% of smallholder farmers adopted the use of minimum tillage, while 10% of them adopted agroforestry. While in the MVP model, that's the multivariate probit regression analysis, they included also characteristics which are relevant for the adoption of climate smart practices. And these variables include household size, age, sex, and educational attainment. The average household size is about 6 members, and 86% of them are male-headed households, while education attainment level is of averages about 8 years. The correlation of climate smart practices. This table gives a description of the correlation of climate smart practices. And from the table above, I think there's a correlation between the second adoption, the climate smart practice, and the first one. And the positive sign signifies that they are complements. Using the background, my econometrics background, and the RHO 3.1 indicates that the interaction between the first climate smart practice and the third one as substitute. Right, that means the increase in the use of one reduces the decrease in the other. So the correlation coefficient of climate smart practices. He said, note from table 2, 1 is composting, 2 is crop rotation, 3 is zero tillage, 4 is agroforestry. The correlation coefficient of the climate smart practices considered in this study suggested that some of the climate smart practices under consideration have positive correlations. This implies that CSPs under study complement each other in a plot where they are adopted. That means crop rotation and use of compost, agroforestry and use of compost are complements. While the negative correlations meant that practices are substitute. That means the probability of using minimum tillage decreases the use of compost and vice versa. So the table 3A, this table gives the result of the MVP model adoption of climate smart agricultural practices. Sorry, I can't incorporate this table. So I'm going to the next slide. The table 3B result of MVP model adoption of climate smart practices. So the influence of social networks on adoption of CSPs in Nigeria. This section presents the results of our regression analysis. That's the MVP model. And table 3 shows results from a multivariate regression in which they estimated the effect of social networks in adoption of climate smart practices in Nigeria. And from their result, they found that being a member of cooperative society influences the adoption of use of organic compost and minimum tillage. And that, however, being a member in informal group influences the adoption of compost and minimum tillage, while being a member of a formal group influences adoption of crop rotation and agroforestry in Nigeria. The result is plausible in the case of Nigeria, as membership to farmer associations provides access to modern sources of credit and input for intensifying agricultural production. The explanation of the result continues. Adoption of climate smart practices is not only affected by social network size, but also by household, farm, and institutional characteristics. And that household and demographic characteristics such as household size, gender, and years of formal education of farm household are also found to be significant determinants of adoption of CSPs. Sex has a negative significant influence on adoption of crop rotation, which implies that male farmers tend to adopt crop rotation compared to women in the farm households. The results also show that household size has a negative and significant effect on the adoption of crop rotation and minimum tillage, while it has a positive and significant effect on adoption of agroforestry. The effect of education is also negative and significant, implying that less educated farmers are more likely to adopt agroforestry, and that land tenure has a positive and significant effect on adoption of minimum tillage. The conclusion: this study has investigated the effect of roles of social networks on the adoption of climate-smart practices in Nigeria. Their results strongly suggest that social network is a very critical factor of technology adoption, and that in the absence of formal information sources, promoting social networks, informal community structures, and social ties will therefore be important for the adoption of new technologies. Policy intervention should therefore consider the crucial role of informal social networks ties as a source of timely information for smallholder farmers in Nigeria. Okay, that is the end of their presentation.
On the topic value chain platform as models for actors coordination. In this presentation, will be answering about collective action, in which we are referring collective action as organized agency by a group to promote their own interest. Collective action occurs when more than one individual is required to contribute to an effort in order to achieve an outcome. What we've seen is that acting collectively towards a given common goal or individual objective has been considered key in every investment focusing market. In this regard, value chain platform is one of the tools where actors meet and commit to partner to coordinate and learn from each other towards sustainable profits. So we'll also be looking at case studies from Malawi, where the African Institute of Corporate Citizenship, AICC, has championed institution of a number of platforms in the cotton, legumes, and rice value chains. Next slide. Value chain platforms as actors for coordination. As already alluded to, acting collectively towards a given common goal or individual objective is now considered a key in every investment focusing on market. So when we are integrating value chain platforms, we find that in the economic development process, it can offer opportunities for learning, production, and innovative capabilities building in various business networks. Over time, we've seen that there can be three types of platforms: those that are farmer-based, value chain-based, and those that are accidental. Next slide. Coordination will mean that we are managing interdependencies between activities, and it is therefore a call for inter-organization value creation. We find that a workable coordination is strengthened where there's some legal enforcement to ensure agreements are followed. But studies also reveal that there are also contracts where actors just depend on verbal or written agreements without assistance of a lawyer. But these are often labeled as weak in a sense that there are no enforcement mechanisms between them. Next slide. Next slide. So in terms of the concept of the value chain platforms, we find that we can deduce that a platform is a network between individuals that have same interest, and within this network, these actors are looking on how to cooperate in a business sense. Next slide. As given by this figure, we are trying to depict a framework which is combining innovation systems and value chains platform. So in essence, we are looking at the process dynamics in which we are linking all the stakeholders in the value chain, from the farmers who are at the resource to production, which is done by farmers, and again processing, which can also be done by the processors and the farmers themselves. We are also linking these to traders, retailers, and of course consumers. So as we are linking these, we are also looking at other facilitating functions, which include those that are in the government providing extension, those that are in research, which includes research organization, and some NGOs also, like in our case AICC also does research, and of course the civil society organizations, which provide both extension and research. So the platforms will exist to link all these stakeholders, to bring them together so that they can champion and achieve one goal. So in the agro industry, we see that different value chains may have a platform based on how they are closely linked in the economic system. Research in other areas has shown that through the platform, there's effective linkage between farmers and microfinance, and between farmers and the traders. An example of nationalized value chain platform in Ghana has also shown that the rice farmers were linked to processors and buyers, and the processors were also linked to credit institutions to boost their capital. So in essence, these platforms are helping to link different players in the given value chain. Next slide. So for Malawi, we at AICC we also have an experience with the value chain platforms in which AICC has championed the establishment of 4 commodity-based value chains. These are legumes, rice, cotton, and beef. So these platforms in essence have captured the entire system and enable partners to see the sector as a system and understand the important linkage that needed to be exploited. So the stakeholders in these platforms have comprised farmers, farm organizations, input suppliers, traders, processors, researcher institutions, financial institutions, and non-governmental organizations, including government. So in essence, the platforms have aimed at coordinating and enhancing collaboration among value chain players along the thematic areas of production, market development, processing, and value addition and institutional development. Next slide. So we've seen that the value chain platforms are an innovative way for actors coordination and business development, because the platforms have provided a space for learning and change. They have also played a positive role in the agriculture sector by improving the production and income of small rural producers. In addition, value chain platforms have provided a podium where new ideas are shared. Joint learning and coaching has also taken place. Value chain platforms have also given stakeholders complementary competencies in which learning has taken place. This has been mutual learning where face-to-face interactions have taken place, and the collaboration have also taken place between farmers, agro dealers, and other service providers that have been involved in these platforms. Next slide. Coming back to case studies of Malawi, where AICC has championed the 4 platforms. First, we look at the cotton platform. This cotton platform has been championed by AICC, and the stakeholders in the cotton platform have included the Minister of Agriculture, Food Security, the Association of Malawi cotton ginners, cotton farmers themselves, cotton seed crushers, spinners, and credit institutions, just to mention a few. So in all this, AICC has acted as a platform facilitator, and has been the secretariat to run these platforms. But what we've seen over time is that the championing of the cotton platform has formed the basis of formation and establishment of the Cotton Council of Malawi, which is now run by the government. Next slide. Another platform that we've seen being formed is the Legumes Development Trust. This one was established by AICC in 2013. So the LDT has, just like the other platforms, has been able to work through technical working groups. These have included the production, the marketing, in the institutional development, including the value addition technical working group. So we've also seen that the Legumes Development Trust has been key in disseminating legumes information on production, marketing, value addition through the production of quarterly outlooks, which are produced every 3 months. This has also been the case with the other 4 platforms. Next slide. Another case study is a look at the National Rice Development Trust. The National Rice Development Trust is a coordinating body in the rice value chain. It is aimed at enhancing collaboration of the stakeholders of value chain to consolidate various efforts so as to advance and promote the development of competitive rice value chain in Malawi. Again, this one was formed in 2013 after realizing that there was a challenge of uncoordinated efforts among the stakeholders in the rice value chain. So to this far, the NRDP boasts a number of achievements, chief of which is the increased collaboration on advocating for issues on the rice value chain interest, such as inclusion of the rice seed in the famous subsidy program in Malawi. Next slide. So from these value chain platforms, we've learned that there's a number of lessons and the successes that we can look into, or indeed the factors that can help these platforms to be successful. So we've seen that the strong coordination and structure of value chain has ensured visibility of agri-food products movement from production to consumption. So that one is a lesson that we are learning, that where there's strong coordination and the structure of the value chain, that ensures that the agri-food products will be visible and the movement should be smooth from production to consumption. And again, we've learned that coordination helps to align symbiotic activities of the actors towards achieving production and marketing efficiency through logistic management, incentive sharing, and access to market information. We have also learned that the strengthening of efforts towards achieving sustainability in a sector by providing the right combination of expertise and analysis to scale up in priority areas. So these platforms are there to strengthen efforts in achieving sustainability of the sector. Next slide. In terms of success, we've learned that there is a need of a number of success factors, which we've seen that the establishment of regional value chain platforms that later culminate into national platform allows for proper coordination of the platform. So in this case, we are looking at a model in which the platform has different levels in which we are looking at the national level, but then we are saying that it should start at the regional level, where issues from the regional level requiring more support or policy support should now move into the policy level. We are also looking at actors wanting to participate in the platform should be assessed as to what their motives and objectives are, so that indeed there can be that one goal that actors in that platform are trying to pursue. Another success factor we are looking at is that we should have a neutral facilitation as a requisite for success of a value chain platform. In our case, it has been easy because AICC was a neutral facilitator, was doing all these platforms. Next slide. Again, we are looking at the leadership of platforms should be steadfast. The platforms should include government priorities, and again that there should be strong public-private partnerships. Lastly, for these platforms to be successful, they should possess long-term sustainability plans. That's the end. Thank you.
Okay, according to what Rebecca posted on the text chat, she said she didn't hear anything about the grassroots participants in the platforms and what were the composition of the platform and how did it empower the farmer. So,
All right.
Rashid, if you can't,
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear us?
All
Yeah,
right.
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so you're asking in terms of
There's a question for you
hello?
on the group chat, Rebecca.
Okay, in terms of the grassroots participant and how it empowered the farmers. So as already indicated, AICC was just as a facilitator of the formation of the platforms. As members, it includes all the civil society organization and the government organizations that have a stake in a particular value chain. We can pick one value chain, talk of legumes. So we are looking at a lot of organizations that are also advancing the regions. They become members of these platforms, including the farmers themselves. And we also take on board the government because history to this formation of the platforms is that they came about because we had a program at AICC, which was the Malawi Agricultural Partnership Programs. So a program when a project they will more or less at one time have to phase out. So that's why we bring on board the government for sustainability. So to answer that question, the farmers themselves, the government, and the other institutions doing research, they are also a part of the platforms. In terms of how the farmers are benefiting, they are benefiting in terms of information as already alluded to. And again, the trainings that are conducted in the platforms, there are also linkages in the platforms where the farmers are linked to service providers. These include financial institutions. They also include the traders and the processors, where there's that linkage between smaller farmers and the large agribusiness processors. So in that case, they are benefiting because as the groups, they can sell and they can learn more about maybe value addition from the process that have been linked to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Rashid's response to Rebecca's question. Do we have any other question posed for Rashid from the audience? Okay, Zainab wrote in the group chat also. She said,
Yes.
Are there any bureaucratic issues since it involves government?
Yeah, just as I was coming to this meeting, I'm coming from a board meeting for the Legumes Government Trust, which we conducted today here. Indeed, there are those bureaucratic issues involving government because as we see when we are discussing the issues, as I alluded to, that these platforms, they start from the technical working groups. So we expect that the issues discussed there at the technical working groups, they move on to cascade up to the board, which we are meeting today. Later on, there are some issues that they are supposed to be taken maybe at policy level to involve the government. But recently, we are pushing for an issue of structured markets, where we want to have what we call export mandates for the legumes, because to this far, the market for the legumes is not organized, unlike the tobacco. But then we find that there are those issues, because if you want maybe to meet somebody in the government, then you have to book for the time to meet them. And it's not always easy to meet people like the Principal Secretary of Agriculture, for example. You have to book meetings, and sometimes they will have to look and do that thing, and it takes a lot of time for you to eventually have a chance to interface with these people. Of course, what we've done is that in these technical working groups, and indeed in the board, we have some members that are coming from the government. Like in the board right now, at the board of the Legumes Government Trust, we have the director of crops in the Ministry of Agriculture. But still more, the issues that are discussed at the board level, and indeed at the technical working group meetings, some that are putting a blame maybe on the government. It can be difficult for this person alone to champion them, to take them to his superiors. So there's need for that booking of meetings with these, and this tends to take a lot of time.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think there's no other question coming forth for Rashid.
Hi everyone. So we've come to the end of this of our panel. So I think we're able to gain one or two things from our discussion. We started with Dr. Ranjini, and she told us about the ASHAS group and how they link health service, public health service to rural area. So the ASHA group is more like a collective platform. And we went on to also see how some financial savings groups also help to foster rural innovation. That was from Linda. Then we also talked about cooperative society as a collective platform as well. Then I remember Rebecca also presented to us about how farmers come together to solve crop and pest issues and some other challenges of social fabrics. Then we also read slides on how social networks have been able to foster climate smart agricultural practices in Nigeria. Then we were also able to discuss cooperative societies' impact in Nigeria as well. Then Rashid from Malawi also told us about value chain platform and how all these commodity networks help to foster rural innovation in Malawi. So we may have, if there are other comments or suggestion from the audience, which you want to talk about, you can maybe in a minute try to raise your hands, or we can discuss. But now we've passed the time for this panel session. So even though we cannot cover up everything, we know development work continues, and we have a lot of aspects to put in our efforts to promoting global development. So I just want to say thank you to everyone that has participated in our panel, and we are also open to any other suggestion. So you can find us, send us a mail through the panel. So any of us, either me, Zainab, or Uyilola, so you can find us. In case there are other discussion, please feel free to reach one another so we can go on to move on development works together. So if there are no raised hands or questions, so I would just like to formally close this panel. Thank you so much to everyone.